All right, everybody, this is Eric, founder of Thrivality and medical chaos detective. Today I am joined with my good friend and colleague, Bill Reddy, licensed acupuncturist, kung fu martial artist, Qigong master. How are you?
Doing well. Can't complain.
Awesome. All right, well, today we're going to talk a little bit about detox, Bill. And so today we're going to cover what is detox, types of detox, right? So you've got water fasting, dry fasting, something called, like mono diets where you're eating, like, say, just fruit or milk. There's colon, there's cellular, and then there's combinations of all those. We'll also cover why we need detox, right? So what are some of the common contributors to metabolic chaos that are in, our environment that we need to detox from? How we do it, right? So how do we want to go about this detox effort, and how do you pick where to start? How acupuncture can support it, right?
Woohoo.
Yep. And then some best practices, right? So you want to sort of ramp up mitochondrial energy before you start, deeper types of detox. You want to prep the liver. You want to make sure your drainage pathway. So we'll kind of get into all that. But first, let's talk about what is detox. So Bill, in your mind, how would you describe detox? Do you want to take a shot at a definition?
Sure. I think detoxification for a human body is one where you're trying to remove anything that blocks positive health.
Yeah, I was at a retreat a couple weekends ago, and the instructor it was a Qigong type retreat, and the instructor was talking about how humans are basically an antenna. We're picking up energy from the earth in terms of food and water, but also just the vibration. That's why you feel better when you walk, in nature, in the forest, or out on the beach, right? You're picking up sort of that vibration. The Japanese call it forest bathing. And you can sort of think of detox as things that sort of, alter, right? That cause, biochemical or energetic metabolic chaos is the way I would describe it. And so the detox is basically the process of moving those things, out of the body, right? So you've got your skin on the outside, so sometimes you can move them through the skin through things like skin brushing, but then you've got to kind of move it on the inside out, right? So from the extracellular matrix through the cells, from the cells to the extracellular matrix to the lymph, the kidneys, the liver, the colon. So detox is the process of moving those things out through the urine, through the feces, through the breath, through the skin. And there's lots of kind of ways to pursue these things. But yeah, so detox in short is the process of moving things that cause metabolic chaos or problems, sort of in humans being able to be healthy and create energy, and manage energy, and moving those things that impede basically health. Now, there's lots of different types of detox, right? So there's water fasting, dry fasting. So about a year ago, I had just gotten back from a trip to Europe where I had done a 9-day dry fast. So that's no food, no water. And I did it with a Russian doctor over in Montenegro and his team. And it was a really powerful experience. I don't necessarily advise dry fasting for everybody, certainly not if it's your first rodeo. I had to do several prep fasts to get ready for that. But I learned a lot, and I see, water fasting or dry fasting is an important tool, in the detox thing, but it's definitely not right for everybody. So we'll get into that a little bit. There's also these things called mono diets, right? So I've done a couple of these over the years where, you drink only milk or goat's milk or something like that. And that lets the body kind of, relax, right? Because you're not eating, meat, cheese, solid foods, vegetables, things like that you have to break down. And so it can give the body, quite a reset. Another mono diet example would be, Steve Jobs is famous for eating only apples. That wouldn't work for me given my gut health, but some people will just do like a fruit type fast. And then there's these modified fasts where people put like maple syrup and lemon and things like that in water and drink that for several days. That's kind of known as the master cleanse. And then you also have these ideas of like a colon cleanse, right? Where you take a bunch of herbs and, you may do a modified diet. Ideally, you would do a modified diet, right? Where you're kind of backing off on solid food and you're trying to kind of cleanse the colon. I've done several of these over the years, and they can be really, really helpful. And then another type is what I would call a deeper cellular cleanse, right? Where you're trying to move heavy metals, mold, toxins, plasticizers, things like that, from the cells into the extracellular matrix, lymph, kidneys, liver. And that's probably the most involved type of detox, and I think the one that needs, more preparation. And then of course you've got combinations. You can kind of mix and match these. You can do a couple different types of detox at a time. Any questions or comments on that, or anything you add or edit?
So when I bring up detox to my patients, the first thing they ask is, well am I going to blow it out my ass? Because they immediately assume it's a colon cleanse.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's because that's what their friends talk about. So, to be clear, that's only one of a variety of cleanses, and that we also bioaccumulate things. So, for instance, there's a guy named a naturopathic physician by the name of Joe Pizzorno, and he found, or at least he made the direct connection between it's mercury in the atmosphere that's connected to diabetes, and why the diabetes is on the rise. So that was news to me. I went to a medical conference, 4 or 5 years ago, where he presented his data, and we're talking parts per billion, so it's very small, but you're breathing every day, and so and you say, well, where's the mercury coming from? And it's because there's really tiny bits of mercury in coal. They burn a lot of coal in China, and so it
comes our way.
Yeah, in the ionosphere.
Yeah, well, I think that brings us to the next point is like, why do we need it, right? And I think I was doing some research over the weekend on fertility rates, and some of the statistics were like male testosterone is down by 57%, something like that, over 50% in a 2017 study versus I think the 1970s, something like that. You might be more familiar with these statistics than I am.
I know that sperm count took a dive, and it's about 50% of what it was in the 1980s.
Yeah, so that's scary, right? That means as a species, we're in real trouble, right? If our fertility rates or our capacity, right, to bear the next generation or create the next generation is down 50%. And that's just an absolutely striking and scary number. And what was interesting is this really, so I was doing this on ChatGPT, and it was really quite striking how fertility rates are really down across the board in industrialized countries. So the US, Canada, UK, Australia were at the top of the list for the biggest challenges around fertility.
And
Japan.
Yeah.
South Korea. Let's see. The Netherlands, Germany were also at the top of the list. France. So these are all industrialized countries, and so we're seeing this drop in fertility really across the developed world, and it's super freaky. I think I've maybe said this in a past podcast, but Dr. Neil Nathan, who's one of the kind of the OGs in the functional health world, he's now retired, but on a recent podcast he said with my friend Scott Forsgren, is that in the 90s he had one sensitive patient a year. When by the time he retired, he had over, like, all of his patients were sensitive. And what he meant by sensitive is like they were sensitive to supplements, they were sensitive to detoxification. I can remember him talking about how he would give, some of his patients could handle like one little drop of chlorella, for example, which helps chelate, and that's all they could handle. right? Which is really scary because chlorella is pretty mild. So yeah, we are living in a toxic soup, and part of the challenge is that you can't. Some of it you can't see it, right? And I see this across my client population, is that most of the people that work with me are in this chronic, complex category where they have these challenges with fatigue, gut issues, brain fog, and it's this broader Lyme, mold, category. But there are so many factors from our environment, like EMFs, heavy metals, plastics,
forever chemicals.
Yeah, PFOAs. Is that,
yes.
Yeah, BPA is another one, and it's really problematic. As a matter of fact, one of my clients is a melanoma patient, and I'm supporting him, sort of on identifying the contributors to metabolic chaos. He's got a really good medical team that's helping him on the cancer side. But we did a Vibrant Total Tox test. It was really quite striking. What came back is he was full of mold, and then things like BPA, which is a plasticizer, and also metals, right? And he doesn't really know where he picked this stuff up. So we see this, and the other thing that we see too, and this really speaks to the reason why we have to detox. I was talking to a colleague over at MeScreen. So MeScreen is a mitochondrial test that's now available. It's really kind of cutting edge. I'm running it with more and more of my clients. And the physician that I was speaking with said that when she talked to the lab's creator, Dr. Patel, who does a lot of work with Joe Dispenza, that everybody's cellular membranes is in pretty rough shape. So basically that cell membrane is super important because it creates what we call a gradient, a charge inside and outside the cell. You need that gradient to be able to move nutrients in and detox, and toxicants out, waste out. And so everybody's membrane's in really rough shape, and I think that's due to the toxic soup, we're living in. So
and the oils, and circling back to the whole thing about fertility is xenoestrogens or estrogen-like compounds.
Yeah.
And so and BPA is a perfect example of that, where it mimics the molecular structure of estrogen, and so people get estrogen dominant, and it throws things off. And so a lot of women have a high FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, which keeps the sperm and egg meet. So that zygote can't implant into the endometrium. So they're chemically pregnant, but they don't go to term because they can't implant. So there's a whole host of blocks that keep things from moving in the proper direction.
Yeah.
And so with men, we're pretty simple. We just have three things. It's morphology, motility, and number. And so number is one of the big ones. The more you have, the better chance you have of connecting with the egg. But a lot of times there's problems with morphology and motility. You can have it where the flagellate, the tail, only flicks in one direction.
Yeah.
Yes. In which case it just does circles, and it can never get up the fallopian tubes. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, we were my wife and I was sharing with me over the weekend that there's a couple in our orbit who are trying to conceive, and they're it looks like they're using IVF to try and do it, and they're in fertile range, right? They're not 55 trying to have a baby late. And you and I have talked about this, like the explosion. So we're here in Fairfax County, Virginia, and I think in the 90s there was like one fertility clinic, and now there's how many did you say?
There's about 15 within a 5-mile radius.
Yeah. Right. So this is clearly. We have a huge biological mismatch. Our environment is not matching the one we grew up in, and it's largely, invisible, right? We can't see these things. We have to we feel it in terms of how we feel in our energy level for many people. Not for everybody. I was talking to a family member yesterday, and she's like, "I'm so thankful. I'm in my mid-50s, and my energy's great, and I feel fine." So there are a lot of people that feel fine, but once that scale starts to tip and you don't feel better, or you don't feel great, you're not sleeping well, or your energy's low even though you slept well, it becomes a spiral.
Yeah, there's non-specific symptoms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to recap, yeah, we're living really in a toxic soup, right? And that's the challenge, and that's really why we need, to detoxify on a regular basis, because eventually it's gonna catch up with us, right?
Yeah, in the 1700s, it was not terribly necessary, but with pollution and everything, the 1800s, 1900s, and then today, because the chemicals are just so rampant, just drinking bottled water, cosmetics are something that's really huge in your applying, because it's stuff that you put on your face is going right into your skin, and so right into your bloodstream. So, and even though it's tested on animals, doesn't entirely mean that it's non-toxic. It just means that it didn't kill them.
Oh, the world in which we live. Yeah. So just to recap, so we need it. Our environment is toxic. We've got mold, metal, false estrogens, EMFs, plastics, false, xenoestrogens that are really wreaking havoc on our biology. And so we need to move those things out. Eventually it's going to catch up with us, right? And that's going to present as, fatigue, fertility issues, sleep issues, brain fog, those kinds of things. We really haven't touched on it in depth, but EMF toxicity is a really controversial topic. I'm not sure how much research you've done on it. I was kind of doing research on it over the weekend, and I tried to ask about okay, what are the pros? The data that would support that EMF is toxic, and then what's the data that so says it's not a problem? And what was really striking is the independent studies say it's a problem, and then the industry funded studies say it's not a problem. So that kind of tells you, right there.
Follow the money. Yeah. So there's a book that's called "What's Ailing You," and it's about the biological effects of non-ionizing radiation, which is what EMF falls under. And I edited the book. And so before that time, I knew a little bit, but not much. But after reading this book and going through, and she just wanted to clean up the grammar, etc., because she wasn't a professional writer, but she was having all these issues, and people thought she was cuckoo. And so she actually got a Gauss meter, etc., and checked her home, and just behind us this huge transformer. And there's definitely science to show that children who grow up with near transformers have a high incidence of leukemia. That 6% of the people in the United States are sensitive to EMF in some way.
What's the percentage again?
6%.
6%.
Yeah, and so
that's the conscious. Not necessarily they're aware of what's causing the sensitivity, but I guess we can measure it. But then there's the whole. I mean, it still affects everybody.
Yes, and just like you said about soup, you think about, now radio waves are not so threatening, but we've got radio waves passing through us. Now we're on Wi-Fi. A lot of people say that 5G is really negative to our health and well-being. But just using the phone and holding it up to your head, they showed that with children, because their skull is a little bit thinner, that they can have a greater chance of brain cancer in the future than adults, because we just have a little thicker bean, and so there's a little less effect. And of course, now we've got things where you're not holding it against your ear all the time, which is helpful.
Yeah. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about EMF detox, or at least mitigation, which is a really, we could do a whole podcast on that. But
yeah, there's products like this, which is called Harmony, and there's been some studies where you can have what's called a red blood cell aggregation, where red blood cells get clumped together, and when they do, they're not flowing properly. It can be really problematic. People who have fibromyalgia, a lot of times it's because they're not marching through the capillaries very well. And there's been studies that this actually separates
the Harmony pendant.
Yeah, the before and after. Yeah. But I'm not selling these or anything. I honestly, I haven't noticed a huge difference. Sorry, Harmony, doing it versus.
Yeah, I have one too, and I haven't worn it in quite a while, just because I sort of, and I've tried a zillion of these things. I have the Citropics, bubble. And I've got this on the Schumann Resonance 7.83, I think it is, at level 3, which is, I think 100 microtesla, something like that. And so I seem to feel it when it's on 100. But yeah, these things are subjective, and I think the science is still really evolving. I also have a Blue Shield device that I've had for like 5 years, and I wear that. And I seem to feel the most impact from that one. So that's BLU Shield. And I do seem to notice a difference. But yeah, I think the science on measuring this stuff is, still really evolving. So.
And to protect my testicles, I tuck in aluminum foil every day. I kind of crinkle when I walk.
I love it. Little humor. Little tin hat humor. Huh?
There we go, yeah. Protect the nuts.
Oh, gosh, that's funny. All right, so how do we do it, right? We've sort of identified that our environment is really sort of this biological mismatch, right, from where we kind of came from, and, the environment that we're living in today is quite toxic. So I think one of the things we have to think about is, what is the broader clinical presentation of the client, right? Like, what's their health history? So, for example, if someone, ate fast food at McDonald's for 20 years, I might start with a colon cleanse, right? So I think it's always important to kind of know where you might be in terms of your health history or what you've been through. And then that gives us clues on, where to start. So someone who's had a poor diet for a long time, I probably wouldn't start with a deeper, cellular detox, for example. Or someone who might have, high mold or heavy metals. Eventually we want to get to that, level of cellular detox, right? But I'm going to kind of consider that broader clinical presentation of the client and say, hey, we probably need to kind of get their mitochondria repaired and working along a little bit and producing a little bit more energy, so they have the vital reserve, the energy to actually move those toxins out. Because if your mitochondria are really, down here, you need to kind of strengthen them before you're going to start again. And it's kind of a little bit of a balancing act, right? Because the toxins impede the mitochondria. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, but I think you really have to consider, the broader clinical presentation of the client and where they're at, what's their health history, and, where's the best place to start.
And also, signs and symptoms. So, for the listening audience, a symptom, so signs are what we see, what the clinician sees, and then symptoms is what you report. And so things like skin problems, atopic skin disorders are common. That so the skin is a detoxification organ. It's the largest organ in our bodies. And that if you've got something going on and you're wondering, what's this coming from? A lot of times it's just a toxic buildup.
Yeah.
And so, going into a sauna and sweating a lot of times, that can help, especially with lead. And you take some extra garlic. So when you talk about, some people will just blindly take a kidney cleanse or take a liver cleanse, right? When you talk to the audience about what order it should be done in and why that's important.
Yeah. And again, these are general principles. I think, again, it really depends on the client. I think a great place to start for a lot of people, if they haven't done cleansing before or detox, is to start with a colon cleanse, right? And there's all kinds of varieties of these out in the market. One of my favorite go-tos is a product called Oxy powder. It's made by Global Healing Center. Dr. Group, he's a really great formulator. And that uses magnesium oxide to kind of just bubble through the digestive tract and kind of loosens things up. And I often like to pair that with, Mimosa pudica, which is a product from Cellcore called Pair 1. And then, depending on their presentation, Pair 2 or Pair 3, right, to move kind of toxins and bugs out, and then weaving in some sort of a binder, right, to kind of capture stuff. So if someone's had a poor diet, that's a great place to start. And in general, colon cleansing is really great because you're kind of moving things through. And as you go deeper into these detox protocols, you gotta have a colon that's
functional.
Yeah, that's functional. Yeah. So that can be a great place for people to start. I think the next place would be like with a liver cleanse. So liver cleanses can be really helpful. And there are several, different types of liver cleanse, right? You can use things like herbs like milk thistle and, Port de Arco to kind of break things up. Or there's these liver flush, protocols where you drink apple cider or apple juice for a week. You eat a lighter diet, and then at the end of that, you drink a concoction of lemon, and olive oil,
Yeah.
right? And Epsom salts, believe it or not. So you drink the Epsom salts on the last day,
And so
just
the olive
Epsom-
oil blows open your gallbladder,
right?
to allow everything to.
Yeah, and so that kicks out, what people describe as these little green gallstones. And I've done these, and it's quite striking what comes out. So liver cleansing can be, another great place to start. Simple water fast. Water fast where you're just drinking, water instead of eating. That can be a great place to start. And there's a lot of things you can do to kind of, like taking minerals, for example. My favorite's bean minerals, but and that can really kind of help, move the toxins out of the body and make the transition to not eating a little bit easier. But water fasting's tough, And then there's dry fasting. Dry fasting is where you're not eating or drinking anything. And actually the transition, believe it or not, on dry fasting to ketosis, right? With this stage where you stop eating and the hunger pains that you typically get are actually less on a dry fast than they are on a water fast.
Interesting.
Yeah. You'd think just the opposite. But because you stop drinking, the body just goes into real quick. It just shifts to ketosis. Whereas if you're drinking water, it's kind of like, okay, where's the food, Bill? You're still drinking, come on, feed me. So it gives you those hunger signals for, a little bit longer. So, so there's also, kidney cleanses, things like that. And again, that's, you're going to taking herbs to do it. So there's a variety of types of cleanses. And I think just to recap, I think colon's a great place to start. And then from there, water fasting, a little bit of dry fasting, liver cleansing, are really good places to start. And then you can move into these deeper phases of cellular cleansing. So if someone's got mold, for example, or heavy metals, right, that's a whole other type of cleansing. And so what I like to do is take a mitochondrial first approach to these deeper cleanses where you're, as I mentioned, strengthening the mitochondria, right, with things like fatty 15, which is this really new odd chain fatty acid that helps repair the membrane of the cell. Phosphatidylcholine, so I love the Body Bio's product to help, their Body Bio PC to help rebuild those cellular membranes. Research Nutritionals has an ATP 360 product, which is also supportive of the membrane repair, but it's also giving some nutrients for the Krebs cycle. So I'm a real big fan of sort of supporting the mitochondria and spinning that up. And then also I think a really important step is to get the body the minerals that it needs through via humic and fulvic acid. So my new favorite in this department is a product called B Minerals, and it's really a two-part product. So there's a fulvic part, right, which can get into the cell and carry basically 60 times its weight in waste out and nutrients in. And then the humic part can come in and sort of carry it out of the body. So the fulvic is into the cell, out of the cell. The humic is out of the body. And of course, it's providing magnesium and potassium and sodium and zinc and some of these, but it's really trace amounts, but it's in the right balance, and it's a freshwater sourced mineral, so it's much more compatible with our biology versus salt based. So I think those are really important prep steps: is to spin up, support the mitochondria, heal that membrane, get minerals into the body, so people have the reserve of minerals, because you need minerals to be able to move these toxins in and out of the body. And then you can start to take things like you know, EDTA or other things that kind of help, you know, move these toxins out of the body, like binders, right? You know, to kind of move these toxins out.
Like broken salt chlorella can bind
Yeah, that's it.
metals
Yeah.
and get them out
Right.
of your body.
And, you know, some of my favorites are, you know, heavy metal, HMET from Cellcore, Carboxy. Quicksilver Scientific has one called Ultra Binder, which is really great because it has a lot of different types of binders in it.
EDTA is a good one.
Yeah,
You can
EDTA
do
is
it
yeah.
oral, or you can get it in an IV.
Yeah, and these are things, you know, we work with clients, right, to kind of help figure out what's the right, you know, mix, because everybody's a little bit, you know, biologically different and in a different space. So this is where we work with clients to kind of help figure this out. So we're just giving you general things to, you know, research or reach out to us about.
And speaking of research, look into hydrogenated oils and just find out what it does to you. And once you find out that just the whole osmosis thing with the cell membrane, it really disrupts that. And it's terrible for us. And so the two things you can do is detox, but you should also look at limiting your exposure to whatever is problematic. So, you know, if you have a choice between bottled water or filtered water, go with the filtered water at home. I double filter mine. If you do go with something that's reverse osmosis, just be aware that can strip minerals from your body. So I think short term is great, but long term can actually cause the zinc and magnesium and other things that are kind of important for our health to be reduced in our bodies.
Yeah, if you're using reverse osmosis or distilled water, I think it's really important that you add healthy minerals back into your mix. B minerals would be at the top of my list. You know, as noted to just because minerals are so foundational to so many aspects of our health. I think that's really important. And then there's this whole kind of idea of sauna detox, right? So sauna detox can be really great, especially for metals. And there's all these protocols out there. So Detoxification Nation is a really good source for, I think, what I would describe as like a niacin sauna based, where you're taking increasing amounts of niacin, and that seems to be, you know, a secret sauce to helping. And then you get in a sauna at a really high temperature. There's a whole protocol around this, but a lot of people that, for example, were exposed to toxins like during the 9/11 and the tower collapse in New York City, a lot of these guys that were going, the firefighters and the police and everything, that were on the ground breathing all these toxins from the collapse of the Twin Towers. A lot of these guys got really sick. And so many of them had success with doing these sauna, niacin, you know, detox protocols. So sauna, you know, that's another way to detoxify. All right. And the other thing I want to throw out there too is, you know, I'm a big fan of, so your body has phase 1 and phase 2 detox, right? So this is based on sort of the liver, right? So the liver has phase 1 and phase 2 detox, and this is where it moves, you know, toxins into the liver and then into the bile and out the body. And phase 1 and phase 2, some people say there's phase 3. These steps can get, you know, impaired because you have the toxins that you need to get rid of. And so one of sometimes the important prep phase is supporting the liver, right? And we talked about sort of the liver flush. There's another approach where you can take something called like a liver sauce, which I really like the liver sauce from Quicksilver Scientific. And actually I really like their approach to this. They call it push catch. So liver sauce, and then you could add like L.Ac to it. I'm a big fan of taking liver sauce, 1,200 milligrams of L.Ac, and then glutathione and vitamin C. And so that kind of gets the toxins going. And then you take a binder to kind of catch them and carry them out. So my ideal solution, if you're doing that kind of a detox, would be liver sauce, L.Ac, glutathione, vitamin C. I would definitely want to be taking minerals, right? So it's it's helping move the toxins out of the cell and into the body where the human can capture it, carry it out, and move it up to the liver and then out. So that's a, and then a binder like Ultra Binder for Quicksilver or Cellcore or research nutritionals to kind of help carry this out. And again, we can help clients sort of navigate this, but
so why don't you talk a little bit about Herxheimer and then any negative effects?
Yeah, that's a great call. So Herxheimer is this idea that as you move toxins out of the body, it can create uncomfortable sensations, feelings, rashes. Like you can get skin rashes. I've had skin rashes on my legs. You can feel tired, moody, irritable, grumpy, and that's all kind of what I would classic, Herxheimer reactions. Fatigue, irritability, tiredness, skin rashes, stinky stools, funny smelling urine, discolored urine, all these kinds of things.
Gotcha. And any contraindications? If someone, I don't know, is severely anemic, or is there any conditions where you'd say, you shouldn't do a detox, or you should take very baby steps?
Yeah, well, I think in general, it's always advisable to start slow, so you can kind of get a sense. Like if you've never done any level of detox and you've lived in a semi-arid environment, take it slow as a general precautionary principle. Always consult, with a healthcare provider that can sort of guide you through these steps. I think if someone is deeply fatigued or anemic, then they need to take, precautionary steps and really work with a provider that can help them sort of navigate, this terrain. Because you don't want to overdo it, go too fast. Now, I always try and say you don't want to, and again, this is through many, many hard knocks of me, type A, trying to go too fast. And
full-on sprint.
Yeah, full-on sprint. So well. And I've had cases where, I was, like, for example, I was taking this product called Double Helix Water, and my mitochondria, just in looking back, were not ready for the higher levels that I was trying to take. And so it would ramp me up so much, right, and create oxidative stress. I wouldn't sleep. It was not fun. So I think it's always wise to, start slow. And I've learned the hard way so many times, where I've gone too fast, because I just want to feel good. I want to feel great. I want to good energy and great sleep and great moxie and all that stuff, and it often has blown up in my face. So I've learned the hard way, like, take it slow.
I mean, if you look at nature, how many times have you seen a squirrel dashing down a branch and go, I'm exhausted, I can't take another step? Or a bird hanging upside down on a tree branch, I can't hang on much longer. So I think that there's a lot of energy in nature, but because we're bogged down with work, and things like that it just tends to drag us down as well. So another toxic thing you got to avoid completely is the news.
Great.
We worry about what we put in our mouths, but not what we put in our minds. And I think it's really, really critical that. Do you feel energized? Do you feel inspired when you watch the news? Probably not.
No.
And so many people are just poisoning themselves, because I don't have a TV. I have not watched the news literally in more than a decade, and I'm happy. And they say that if you don't read the newspaper, you don't watch the news, you are uninformed, and if you do both of them, then you're misinformed.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I was talking to someone I recently met at a retreat, and he did this experiment. This is kind of like an Emoto experiment. He took 3 containers of white rice, and one he
put a label
on it, said I love you. The second label is I hate you, right? And then the third one, they just ignored it. And it was really interesting. After a month, they took the lids off and looked at them, and the ones where they put the label "I love you," and I think they would go up to it every day and try and imbue it with the feelings of love, which is very woo woo hoo foo. But it was really, he sent me a picture last night of each of these things.
Wow.
And the one where they daily said I love you, it was basically looked okay. It looked fairly normal. There's a little graying of the rice.
You should mention it's cooked rice.
No, this was uncooked.
Uncooked? Oh my Lord! Wow. Because I thought
well,
mold would.
Actually, you know what? That's a great question.
Yeah.
That's a great question. And now that you say it, I think it must have been cooked.
Because uncooked rice is pretty stable.
It's pretty stable. You're right.
Okay.
So it had to be cooked rice. So then the one where they just ignored it, it didn't look good at all. Like you definitely wouldn't eat it. And then, not that they ate the first one, but and then the third one that had the I hate you was just black. So it is there is really something to our internal dialogue and our internal vibration and what we're taking in from the environment. And I think I like to stay abreast of what's going on, but I also see that the news is quite toxic because you have these small audiences on the extremes of both sides of our political system, and the invective going back and forth between them is really toxic.
And it can get under your skin, if you think about it. They're actually suggesting World War III.
Yeah.
And that's frightening. And growing up, it was all mutually assured destruction, so they always had but it just seems like there's always something to worry about when really, for the most part, there's not a whole lot to worry about.
Yeah. That's a great point. So detoxification from the news and the invective in our environment can be really a good idea. So what about acupuncture? I mean, that's how you spend your time. I mean, as I think about building energy, how could acupuncture sort of complement these various detoxes and be supportive?
So, acupuncture can help with just general energy balance, but what the studies show is that if you have a low GFR, which is glomerular filtration rate, which is a measure of kidney function, that we can improve kidney function. Now, again, if you've got late stage kidney disease, acupuncture is not going to be magical, but there are some herbs that are actually renal protective. If you look at liver function, which again, there's measures and you can have elevated liver enzymes, that acupuncture can also optimize liver function, and that's true for other organs of the body as well. If you have low motility of your large intestine, which means usually constipation, okay, acupuncture can speed it up and get that moving. If you're going too fast and you have diarrhea, actually acupuncture can slow it down. So it can go, it's all about homeostasis. So if it's too fast, it'll slow it down. If it's too slow, it speeds it up. And if your motility is perfect and you do acupuncture on these points on either side of your belly button, nothing happens. So acupuncturists can't really hurt people. Although there are adverse events if you needle an organ or something like that. So, you can get hurt if someone doesn't know what they're doing. There's been a lot of physical therapists doing dry needling, and they'll deep needle points here where it's tight, and they'll puncture the lung. And there's something called a pneumothorax, which will occur. So, but acupuncturists have been beat over the head about what the anatomy is under every acupoint, and there's 361 on your body. So we know what muscles, tendons, ligaments, lymphatic vessels, blood vessels, and arteries are at that acupoint, so that not to puncture it or
go too far,
change the angle.
Yeah.
There's a point here that's very commonly used, and apparently there are some people that will do it's supposed to be a flat insertion, and some people go perpendicularly, and in a very small percentage of the population, 0.5%, something like that, there's actually a genetic anomaly where there's a hole there.
Oh, geez.
And so the needle can go through the hole and puncture the heart pericardium, and you can have what's called a tamponade. So, and that's I'm actually special or invited editor for the AAMA, the American Academy for Medical Acupuncture, and we're doing a special whole journal on safety. And so we're getting all of these safety papers in from across the world, and they asked me because I've done safety analyses in the past.
Oh, okay.
So we just looked at what the safety of acupuncture is, and it's similar to massage therapy. And so the average doctor has about a $60,000 per year malpractice, and mine is about $75 a month, which demonstrates that we don't hurt people on a regular basis, or if we did, then we would have malpractice suits.
Yeah.
So yes, that's my story about the detox. There's things like a plum blossom needle, which you can tap on the skin, and that's supposed to help with just generalized peripheral circulation.
Yeah. And what about just like general energy? Like I think one of the things as you move through detox, you can feel tired. So how could acupuncture kind of help with general constitution? And
so there's great studies on fatigue, specifically for chemotherapy and radiation induced fatigue, but just in general fatigue, yes, acupuncture can help with that.
So those are some of the ways, thanks Bill, that acupuncture can be supportive. So let's kind of wrap up here with some best practices, right? So in my experience, I think it's, ideally, right, if you're gonna go after some of these deeper levels of detox, it would be to ramp up mitochondrial repair and optimization, right? You want to heal those membranes, build up your mineral reserves before you start, taking EDTA or doing, deep sauna work with niacin, or, doing like the liver sauce kind of combo stuff that I talked about. So it's really important to ramp up and repair, build up your mineral reserves before you do these deeper detox. I think starting with a colon cleanse is also a great idea. As said, if you're going to work on the liver, prep it, get some NAC and some liver sauce. Tudka is another one that I didn't mention earlier, but Tudka is this compound that really is supportive of the liver and the bile, helps the body produce more bile basically, and it can help like soften the gallstones if you're going to do a liver flush. So that can be a really good one to take to prep. So liver sauce, Tudka, NAC, glutathione, vitamin C are all things that are really good for kind of getting things moving and preparing the liver for a deeper flush that I mentioned with the olive oil and the lemon and the Epsom salts.
And reducing demands on certain organs. Like, if you do 3 shots of tequila, it's just like punching yourself in the liver. So give it a break. Unfortunately, alcohol is a toxin, and our bodies react to it as a toxin and try to detoxify it using our liver, etc. And but because it's so accepted in our society, we do. And I'm a drinker, and so I try to
tone it down a little bit when you're...
Yeah, I mean, they call me 3 beer Bill because I drink one, spill one, and give one away. So, I'm usually the designated driver, but I definitely enjoy it. But I know that it's my body. I've been reevaluating my relationship with alcohol. And I don't drink much. I'll have maybe 1 beer a few days a week, and that still adds up. I mean, it's 220 calories times, let's say 3. That's 600 empty calories which you're putting in your body. If you don't burn it, you store it, and
it's the
I'm trying to maintain my girlish figure. True, I traded in my 6-pack for a quarter keg, so I gotta work on that.
Yeah. I mean, abstaining from alcohol is one way to actually start the detoxification process. I was talking to a mutual colleague of ours recently, and he's got a patient that just loves his wine every night, and that can cause a lot of metabolic chaos over time. So, abstaining from alcohol is gives your body a break, lets you move it out. And in my mind, there's just so much. If you want to get a buzz on or relax, there's just so much better tools now than alcohol.
Oh, that's valid. They also sell these things that are non-alcohol, but they have some other things in them that are all natural that help you relax.
Yeah,
I'm not
kava
talking about
was- yeah,
CBD, but yeah, more.
Kava's a big one. That's very common.
Yeah, I can't recall. Do you remember do you know the name of any of these products?
I don't.
Yeah,
I don't. I mean, Kava, I think, is a brand. But there are now these like mocktails that you can either mix or buy
right.
that have these, natural compounds in there that are a lot more.
Another thing you can do for yourself is just back off from the processed foods.
Oh, yeah.
Eat, so the Chinese, they say variety and moderation. So maybe have that fried chicken, but don't eat it every day. Have that glass of wine, but don't have the whole bottle, which I think is reasonable. And also, they have this thing called Gucci, and Gucci is not a handbag. It's GU, Gu, and then Chi, energy. So it's the energy that's in food. And so when you look at seeds, they contain the energy that can create an entire tree.
Yeah.
Right? So, and now we know that there's micronutrients in seeds that are kind of power packed with it. And so, and you look at apples, and if you eat a Fuji apple, you get some energy, you get the glucose in your bloodstream, but you're not eating a candy bar where you have that processed sugar just spike your blood sugar, and then your
crash.
pancreas, right, and then you collapse. So, it just eat real food.
Good call.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good call.
Thank you.
So one of the things is you want to make sure that your drainage pathways are prepared. So your drainage funnel starts in your cells, right? It moves through the extracellular matrix, into the lymph, into the kidney and livers, out the colon, out the skin. And I guess to some degree, out your breath, right? When you breathe out, you exhale, you're off gassing. So you do want to kind of prep those pathways. That's a really good, best practice. And there's no one way to do that. We can kind of help you navigate that. But thinking about just making sure that your drainage funnel is prepared and ready to go. And so there are products that support, for example, the extracellular matrix, or as I've mentioned, minerals for the cells, ATP 360 and other things to kind of help prepare the cells for detox, preparing the liver, preparing the kidneys. These are all things that I think are important. And when I work with a client, I'm making sure that their detox pathways, are open before we go down, down this path. And then always start slow, right? Just ease into it. Don't do it like I do and go too fast, and then feel terrible or not sleep. Always ease into it is a really good best practice. So you kind of get used to it. Stop eating the processed foods, reduce alcohol, things like that are really, really general good best practices.
Yeah, there's a standard process cleanse, and one of the things and there's a tub of stuff that you mix and shake and drink, and there's a number of pills you take that include green foods and all that stuff. And what they say is no alcohol, no caffeine, no processed foods, and so you have a really clean diet, and then you do this for 21 days.
Yep.
And then after 21 days, then you start introducing some of the foods that you were eating before and get back to it. So, it's something where it's kind of standard, but I do that once a year, and I feel like that's necessary to tamp down that accumulation of junk, of toxins in our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing we could talk about too is we can run labs to kind of.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how do you measure this? Right. So we can do before and after lab. So I mentioned, one of my clients recently did the Vibrant Total Tox test. It was really revealing, right? This guy's a melanoma cancer patient. And he was just full of mold and metals and environmental compounds. Now, it's an expensive test to run. It can be upwards of $700. But it looks at these three big categories: mold, like mycotoxins, metals, and environmentals. And so it can give you a lot of data for $700 on, kind of where you're at. That's a very sobering test.
Tell them about hair analyses.
Yeah, hair analysis is another good one, right? So hair analysis, so we call it hair test mineral analysis, HTMA. And that can give you a good sense of your mineral status, your metal status, and kind of like adrenal thyroid function. So that's one I like to run a lot. It can be quite revealing in terms of, what's going on. And it gives you like a long-term, status, right? Because it takes a while for those minerals and metals to accumulate in the hair. And these are just samples that you take from the nape of the neck and you send it off to the lab. Within 2 to 4 weeks, they give you the result. And it can be quite helpful to kind of figure out what your mineral status is, what kind of metals you might be having. And it gives you clues about adrenal and thyroid function.
And for the nerds out there, then you can get a before and after. And, and again, you have to wait for the hair to grow out, but, he can do some of the detoxes. And of course, you're going to feel better.
Yep.
But then, several months later, you can snip again and double check. And then you'll see that your burden, your heavy metal burden, et cetera, is less.
Yeah. So those are some of my favorite tests. What else? I mean, the oat test, so organic acids test, can give us metabolites of how things are going. It's not really metal or mold specific, but it can give us clues onto what's going on in the body. You could also do a exclusive metals test. So Quicksilver has a really good one if you really want to get really in depth, on metals. But those are some of my favorites.
Excellent.
Yeah. All right, so let's recap. So what is detox? Detox is the process of moving contributors to metabolic chaos out of the body. This can be mold, metals, false estrogens, plasticizers, the effects of EMF out of the body, right? And there are all kinds of types of detox, and no one is necessarily the absolute right one for everybody. I will run into people that think dry fasting is the absolute, best form of detox out there, and it's like, well, it's a tool in the toolbox. Not everybody has the vital reserve to do a dry fast. I've seen people get worse on a dry fast because they just didn't have the vital reserves to do it. So you have to be really careful. But yeah, there's water fasting, dry fasting, mono diets, colon cleanses. There's cellular level detox. There's sauna. There's combinations of all those, right? We can stack different parts of these detoxes together. Why we need it? We're living in a toxic soup, right? Fertility rates are down by 50% or more in industrialized nations, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon. And then how do we do it again? We've talked about some of the methods, but always it's a good best practice, right? To start slow, to get used to it, eliminate processed foods, cut back on alcohol, and work with a practitioner that can help sort of guide you through the different aspects of detox. Anything you'd add or edit there?
No, sir. I think you did a great summary.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, and the one thing that I would just add that's sort of occurring to me is how do you detox from EMFs? We haven't really talked about that one, and this is kind of controversial. I think some of these devices, like the bubble that I've got here, can help, mitigate the effects of EMFs. But I think the science is very much evolving, and if you go to these companies and you look on the website, I think they've got a ways to go in terms of doing the studies to illustrate this. I think one of the things of minerals, getting the mineral levels up can help repair the cells and taking compounds to repair those cell membranes. Those are things you can do to support and basically build resiliency in the cell so you can kind of withstand the effects of EMF. So those are some of my thoughts on EMF. EMFs, I don't know that you can really detoxify from. I think you can mitigate. There's also these fabrics, which I've experimented with, where you wear the shirt or undergarment that's basically silver lined. Yeah. Again, I think the science on that is evolving, and so I think you just have to experiment and see what works for you. But I think the whole idea, the focus should be not on trying to hide from EMFs, although I think if you can mitigate them through, turning your cell phone off at night, turning off Wi-Fi, those are things that can be helpful. But I think you want to focus on building resiliency because you're just not going to be able to, they're everywhere now, pretty much, unless you really move out into the country.
Yes, I wrote an article it's called The Insomniac's Nightmare. And so just put in my name, Bill Reddy, acupuncturetoday.com, and it'll pick it up. And I did a deep dive into just exposure to not only light off of our devices, but also things like dirty electricity, charging your phone near the head of your bed, and all these other things that will negatively affect our sleep. So yeah, check that out. And then Joe Pizzorno, Pizzorno. Pizzorno has written quite a bit on the topic of toxicity and detoxification. So he actually wrote the Encyclopedia of Natural Medicine.
Wow.
So yeah, it's thick and it's really, really amazing. And thank God he's doing the work that he does.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, that concludes this edition of the Health Detective Podcast. My name is Eric Shad. I'm the founder of Thrivality, THRIVALITY.com. If you want to learn more about my practice and how I work with clients. And Bill Reddy, where can people find your wizardry?
And so it's pretty complex. It's billreddy.com, REDDY, and it's Vital Point Acupuncture in Annandale, Virginia.
Yeah, and it's REDDY, right?
Yeah,
not REA. All right, well, thanks, everybody. And until next time, have an awesome day.